Hi everyone, Existential Crisis here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Kevin Abstract album, Blanket. Singer, songwriter, rapper, producer, Kevin Abstract, who is hitting us with his first solo effort since 2019's Arizona Baby, and this is also the first big musical peep he's made since the demise of Brockhampton, the multi-genre boy band that he was a pretty big figurehead in, that recently crumbled as spectacularly as they exploded onto the scene with their breakthrough Saturation trilogy in 2017. And with the band being done, one thing was for sure. Eventually, we were going to start seeing some solo material, and given that Kevin was a fully functional solo artist before Brockhampton was a thing, chances were high we were going to hear from him first. Or at least he would be the first to drop a full-fledged solo effort that would be worth diving into. And despite Blanket being as short as it has given me a lot to chew over, especially with Kevin switching over so boldly to more of an indie and singer-songwriter musical style, something he's definitely flirted with in the past on solo material, but he's now really going all in on that sound with this new record, but in a way that feels like it's almost at odds with itself. I mean, for one, this record feels like it's running from the past, or specifically Kevin's past as an artist. As this plunge into more of an indie sound, at least in part, feels like Kevin trying to distance himself from any aesthetic or vibe that a fan might associate with Brockhampton. He even goes as far on some of these tracks to obscure or change or alter his voice in such a way where he just sounds like a totally different person or a character. Kevin even makes mention of letting go of a version of himself at one point on the song Running Out. But while a lot of this LP is very much about change and taking on something new, many of these songs see Kevin going back to his past too. It feels like Kevin is doing that in a sense musically, because a lot of the acoustic, sentimental indie pop and folk and rock on this thing feels like a distant memory. And thematically, there's lots of nostalgia throughout this record too, with Kevin looking back at his past or past versions of himself, looking at growing up or relationships and friendships generally. There seem to be a lot of early experiences with romance detailed on some of these tracks too, like on The Grays, which is an eerie anthem that has a danceable groove and kind of an 80s twist to it, but the eerie vocal harmonies and raw guitars are really kind of what drives the mood of this thing, along with the story Kevin tells about having a crush on someone that seems to have to remain secret. Another highlight for me along these lines was the closing track, whose warm acoustic guitars and rustic fiddles, as well as guest vocals from MJ Lenderman and Kara Jackson, make it a highlight, along with the song Simple Mantras about companionship, which is an interesting choice for a record that sonically is so bare and feels so isolated. Which kind of brings me to my next observation about the record, its sound, because again, Kevin is going for a sound on this thing that again is very indie, it's very singer-songwriter, music that usually has a presumption of DIY or being homespun or just bedroom, which I really think is the missing piece of the recipe on a lot of these cuts, as they're not quite as raw as they may seem on the surface in some respects. I mean, I think we get a lot of the bass elements that you would typically hear on an indie project, but they're produced almost like a pop album. And sure, as a result of that, you do have more pop-centric cuts on this record that go over really well. But there are so many other tracks in the track list here that feel like they're in this weird limbo, like the heavily treated vocals and sequence beats on Running Out, making the track have almost a stiff progression to it. And it doesn't have the rawness and the looseness or even the intimacy that a track of this style typically does, which is even more so the case for the song Madonna, a moment on the record where we are hit with some of the most touched up and inhuman, obnoxious vocals on the entire project. Real to me feels like something is missing as well between the tracks. Break beats, again, heavily manipulated vocals, and watery guitar loops. There's so many effects and so much muck between me and what feels like a chance at having any kind of like closeness with the track. Now, there are some songs on the record that I think sound better, but maybe the songs at the core of them are a bit too brief or one-dimensional or sketchy to leave that much of an impression, be that Heights, Spiders in the Dark, or Scream, or even the title track, which at the start sounds like a moody, hushed Elliott Smith type cut that eventually explodes into these screaming walls of guitar chords. And I mean, instrumentally, it feels like we have the makings of a complete song here. You do have those low key moments, you do have those really aggressive and rockin' high points, but it's like there's a lot of blanks that aren't filled out, and the verses are pretty scant, so it just ends up feeling unfinished, or just like, I don't know, like a vague idea. There were only a handful of solid highlights from this thing that I could see myself going back to, including the tone-setting intro, the psychedelic reverb-drenched ballad Voyager, where the record's desires for closeness and love really hit a peak. And then there's What Should I Do, which is a very cute acoustic cut, where the pitched vocals actually add to the endearing vibes of the song, makes the slice of life love story at the core of it that much sweeter. But outside of that, I'm really just either not into or very indifferent to a lot of the material on this record. And I mean, I could get Kevin wanting to dive into something completely different after Brockhampton, but I feel like in his attempt to go as far away from that and anything he had done previously, he kind of bit off a little bit more than he could chew and found himself on top of some sounds that don't necessarily play to his strengths, or maybe he should have just kind of incubated on a little bit longer. I mean, if there is something good to come out of this album cycle, it may be that it does kind of shatter a lot of fans' expectations or perceptions that he's like, you know, Mr. Brockhampton, who's not his own individual artist who can do something different, can do his own thing, can just sort of like forge his own path, which he certainly can. And I'm looking forward to hearing that happen on a future record that hopefully just brings some better songs and production to the table. Feeling a light to decent 5 on this one. Transition, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Kevin Abstract, forever.